Hello and welcome to an episode that deals with different types of photography and its various genres. I'm Yamini Sethi and our subject expert is Kumar Barun. He's a veteran photographer with 7 years of experience in photography, graphic designing and photojournalism and currently working as a senior photographer with fabfashion.com. Today we will discuss the following objectives of the session, which are to understand the various shots used in photography, to understand the need, use and importance of focus in photography, to comprehend the needs and usage of shutter speed. Understanding photography. Photography is an art which emulates technical efficiency. In order to click great pictures, the photographer should not only be an artist at heart, instead be an expert that technically handling the camera. The technical aspects of clicking pictures is gauged by taking shots, setting right focus, maintaining the desired shutter speed and selecting the right subject. All these could be different in different situations. We shall understand the meaning and usage of aforesaid technical aspects in order to comprehend the significance and utility of the same.
To be a good photographer, there are many things that are important. The first most important thing is that you have to be able to see correctly and differently, because you have to be able to establish yourself as a photographer. You have to be able to establish your vision or your sight in a certain way. So how you see, how you frame, how you look at objects has to be a little different, because if you are planning to be a professional photographer, if you are looking at making a career in this line, in that case you have to bring something to the table, which means that you have to have a way to look at things, a way to see things that other people don't see normally. The second thing which is most important is to be able to technically compose the scene, technically look at the different aspects of the scene, understand what is the kind of light, understand what is the kind of situation where you're shooting in, and based on those things be able to set your camera, set your lights, set all the other parameters that are needed to take a good photograph. Sometimes, let's say when you are a journalist, you don't really control many things. Sometimes when you are an event photographer, you pretty much don't control situations. So being very careful about what you do technically and being very, very good at what you do technically is very important. So we saw two things. One is to be able to see, compose correctly. Secondly is to be able to, in any kind of environment, any kind of lighting situations, be comfortable with what you can do. So that means technically you have to be very, very sound. The third aspect which is very important to be a good photographer is to be able to visualize without the camera. So your eyes actually have to be the camera, and how you look at a certain, I mean, it's related to the first thing of being able to see, but also in certain kinds of photography, for instance fashion photography or commercial photography, where you are creating a scene, where you are not really shooting what's going on in the real world, but you are actually creating with models, with characters, with sets, with props. You're actually visualizing a scene, you're actually working on creating something from nothing. You should be able to identify with either the product or the scene and then be able to create a story around it. So the third aspect is also to be able to visualize and create a story.
We shall start with understanding the various shots used in photography. Types of shots. Wide angle shots. The wide angle shot is often called a long shot or wide angle shot. The lens is at its widest focal length and angle of view is large. Wide angle shot shows an entire area, whether it is indoors or outdoors. The wide angle shot is used to show the location where the action will take place. The location could be as small or as large as you wish. The size does not matter. This shot is also used to set the atmosphere of the scene. Is it a warm sunny day, a gloomy rainy day, a tense social situation, or a happy birthday? Since these shots could create mood and give an overall visual experience of the place, person, or thing, the long shot is often referred to as an establishing shot. Another use for the wide angle shot is to cover a broad range of action and show the interrelationships among the subject in the scene. Wide shots should be used occasionally during the production or to re-establish the location of the scene in the viewer's mind. Establishing shots are not on the screen for a longer time. 3 or 4 seconds is a good time. Medium shots. Medium shots can also be called medium close-ups, waist shots, or bust shots. This shot can provide ample coverage of a scene and hold more of the viewer's interest than the wide shot. A medium shot should show a portion of background, but the image size should be large enough to keep the focus of attention on the action taking place. Medium shots are great for showing interaction or demonstration, or for showing a person leaving a room through a doorway. In each these situations, the medium shot would provide a location and yet be close enough to reveal the details of the action. Close-up shots. The close-up is generally not known by any other name. With the close-up, details are magnified. The viewer is provided with smaller detailed bits of action that is taking place in the scene. Close-up of a person delivering a speech would place emphasis on what that part of the speech. The close-up of one person listening to another person will provide the listener's reaction to the speaker. The close-up is an important tool of the photographer. The camera must move in close or the lens zoomed in to show the details of the image and create an emotional response. The emotional tears of a happy bride dancing with her husband at the end of a wedding reception would be lost in wide angle or a medium shot. A close-up provinces the details and creates the emotion. The close-up brings the emotions of the scene to the screen better than any other shot. Extreme close-ups. The best way to define an extreme close-up shot is to give an example. A person's eye, the dial on a watch face, or a hand turning a doorknob would all be the extreme close-up shots. Be careful with close-up shots. They can create different or undesirable impressions of an object or person. An object can look bigger than it actually is, or an individual can become overpowering or overbearing. Close-up greatly exaggerate the movements of a subject, and this will make the action hard to follow and difficult to watch. Viewers have gotten dizzy from watching continuous movements on the screen in close-up shots. Close-up can also cause appropriate and necessary movements of the subject to be lost out of frame. Finally, close-ups have very little depth of field, which makes focusing critical. The slightest change in the distance from the camera to subject will defocus the image. Constant attention must be given to focus with either a manual or autofocus lens. Head and shoulders. The head and shoulders shot is used in news broadcasts. If you think about the television news, you will realize that these shots reveal enough detail to see the subject's lip move and expression on her or his face. Bust shot. This shot shows your subject from above the knees to above the head. It is often used when the subject of the shot is doing something that requires the audience to see some detail. Medium long shot. In the medium long shot, remember not to cut the person off at the knees. With this shot, you can still see the expression on the person's face while getting more information from what is going on around the person. LS, long shot. This shot is useful for someone that is walking or moving. This shot helps in capturing the subject in totality. It's a simple yet very useful shot while depicting a movement holistically. Extra long shot, also known as establishing shot. This shot gives the viewer some perspective as to where the subject is. This is very important if the subject is moving to a new locations or times. Two shot. Two shots are composed when two people are in the scene and their interaction is important. A two shot is a good way to introduce a conversation. From the introduction, you might cut to an over-the-shoulder shot of one person talking or a close-up of the other person reacting to what is being said. OTS or over-the-shoulder shot. The over-the-shoulder shot reveals one subject as seen from over the shoulder of another subject. It stimulates a view of the subject as seen from the second person's eye. This shot is often used in conversations between two people where the director wants to focus on the person speaking. Usually these shots are head shots, which are close-up of the speaker. After we have understood the various kinds of shots and the importance of the same, we shall now move towards another understanding, how to measure the speed at which a photograph is taken. Since this speed can be manipulated and controlled, we can control the quality of the photograph. The speed at which pictures are taken is known as shutter speed. Defining shutter speed. Shutter speed is the amount of time that the shutter is open. In digital photography, shutter speed is the length of time that your image sensor sees the scene you are attempting to capture. A photographer will adjust the shutter speed according to the following factors: aperture opening, available light in the scene, desired effect, film speed.
Now, shutter is actually a device which is covering the sensor in a way that it is not letting the light actually hit the sensor or hit the film. But the moment you raise the shutter, the light actually reaches and hits the sensor and captures and makes the shot, or saves the shot at that. So the duration for which, that means the time value for which the shutter is actually open and then shuts back again, is shutter speed. And that is always a time value. It is always either 1/10 of a second or 1/25 of a second if you go in higher shutter speed. And if you see at this point in time, the setting of the camera, it is f4. That means that is the size of the aperture. It's open to f4. Then you have 125. That is 1/125 of a second, which is very, very small value of time. And the moment I click this with this button over here, it is going to be open for 1/25 of a second. Now if I increase the time value, let's say I were to bring it down to 1 second, so the camera shutter will be open for 1 full second, and you can actually hear the shutter open and 1 second later shut down. So that was 1 second. But if I were to make it much faster, let's say 1/125 of a second, you can barely hear the opening and closing. That's much faster. Or 1/1500th of a second is even faster. So that's the amount of time for which the light comes in and actually has the time to form the image.
Let us understand the feature or characteristics of shutter speed in detail. Shutter speed is measured in seconds. At some places, the speed is also measured in fractions of seconds. The bigger the denominator, the faster the speed. That is, 1/1000 is much faster than 1/30. In most cases, you will probably be using shutter speed of 1/60th of a second or faster. The above speed is used a lot simply because anything slower than this is very difficult to use without the camera shaking. If the camera shakes, this invariably would result in blur in your photos. If you are using a slow shutter speed, anything slower than 1/60th, a photographer will need to either use a tripod or some type of image stabilization. Nowadays, more and more cameras are coming with this built in. 1/125th is treated as the safe shutter speed since this speed helps the photographer in gaining stability in photography. Any tripod is not a necessity for this particular speed. Also, this speed can easily handle camera shake and is adaptable in any or every environment. Shutter speeds are available to you on your camera will usually double approximately with each setting. As a result, you will usually have the options for the following shutter speeds: 1/500, 1/250, 1/125, 1/60, 1/30, 1/15, 1/8, etc. This doubling is handy to keep in mind as aperture setting also doubles the amount of light that is let in. As a result, increasing shutter speed by one stop and decreasing aperture by one stop should give you the similar exposure levels. Some cameras also give you the option for very slow shutter speeds that are not fractions of seconds but are measured in seconds, for example 1 second, 10 seconds, 30 seconds, etc. These are used in very low light situations. When you are going after special effects or when you are trying to capture a lot of movement in the shot, some cameras also give you the option of shoot in B or bulb mode. Bulb mode lets you keep the shutter open for as long as you hold it down. Capturing motion. When considering what shutter speed to use in an image, you should always ask yourself whether anything in your scene is moving and how you would like to capture that movement. If there is movement in your scene, you have the choice of either freezing the movement so it looks still or letting the moving object intentionally blur, giving it a sense of movement.
If you are, for instance, photographing sport or a very fast running animal, in that case, if you were to go for a shutter speed of 1 second, the animal will actually run away and you would probably not have a photograph. So you have to be able to capture the motion, you have to be able to capture the action. So hence your shutter speed really depends on what you want to capture or what you are shooting.
To freeze movement. Whenever a photographer would like to freeze a movement, like in order to capture a surfing or a skiing shot, you will want to choose a faster shutter speed, and to let the movement blur, you will want to choose a slower shutter speed. The actual speed you choose will vary depending upon the speed of the subject in your shot and how much you want it to be blurred.
If you were to go on a higher shutter speed, it can actually capture the motion or stop it in its tracks, as it were. So if you want to actually capture a butterfly flapping its wings or a bee flying, you have to be very, very fast. It has to be values in excess of, even 1/3000th of a second, which is a very, very, very tiny amount of time to open the shutter for. Most smaller cameras or entry-level cameras don't go down to that fast a shutter speed, but a professional camera like this can go to 1/8000th of a second, which is, believe me, a really, really small time. You will be able to capture things which are really moving quick, but again, because you are opening the shutter for a very small time, you have to compensate by light coming in to capture the image by some other way. So it can be by either opening the shutter for a bigger size, that means, the aperture for a bigger size. So what you would do is open it up all the way to something like this, where the hole is actually much bigger, and you can actually see that the opening is very, very wide. Now when I turn it back, the opening actually becomes much narrower. Okay, so and that is controlled by the ring on top over here. The numbers on top will actually give me an idea of how small or how large the opening is going to be. Okay, so the smaller the number, it's on a 2.8 right now. That means the opening or the aperture is much bigger. But the moment I take it to a bigger number, for instance f11, the size of the hole actually becomes much smaller, and right up to an f32, which means pretty much a pinhole sized opening. So the play of aperture size and shutter speed is what really takes the photograph. It's what the combination of which actually takes the photograph.
Motion is not always bad. There are times when motion is good. For example, when you are taking a photo of a waterfall and want to show how fast the waterfall is flowing, or when you are taking a shot of racing car and want to give it a feeling of speed, or when you are taking a shot of a starscape and want to show how stars move over a longer period of time. In all these instances, choosing a longer shutter speed will be the way to go. However, in all these cases, you need to use a tripod, or you will run the risk of ruining the shots by adding camera movement, and which will be a different type of blur than the motion blur.
Now, there are certain times photographers want to show the motion. They want to be able to show the fact that some subject or some object is moving. So in spite of the fact that they will they know there is movement in the shot, they will actually choose a slower shutter speed and let the object move in front of the camera to show the motion. So it can be used for several artistic things. It can be used for very functional things, by like actually showing the motion.
Focal length and shutter speed. Another thing to consider while choosing shutter speed is the focal length of the lens you're using. Longer focal lengths will accentuate the amount of camera shake you have, and so you will need to choose a faster shutter speed unless you have the image stabilization in your lens or camera. The rule of thumb to use with the focal length in non-image stabilized situation is to choose a shutter speed with the denominator that is larger than the focal length of the lens. For example, if you have a lens that is 50 mm, 1/60th is probably okay. But if you have 200 mm lens, you will probably want to shoot around 1/250. While we were discussing shutter speed, it becomes invariably important to understand the use of focus while choosing the right shutter speed. Defining focus. Due to the optical properties of photographic lenses, only objects within a limit range of distances from the camera will be reproduced clearly. The process of adjusting this range is known as changing the camera's focus. Parallel light passed through a lens will always converge on the same point. The distance from the surface of the lens to the focus point is called the focal length and is measured in millimeters. Most lenses are described by the focal length. Zoom lenses have a range of focal lengths, a feat with which accomplished by using a complex series of lenses which can be moved relative to each other. The mm number translates into a real distance from the front of your lens to the chip of your camera. In that way, you can tell that a 400 mm telephoto lens will be much longer than 24 mm wide angle without even looking at the lens. If an object is close to a lens, even several hundred meters away, its reflected light entering the lens isn't perfectly parallel. The closer the object to the lens, the less parallel and the more the lens must be moved in order to keep focused. This change is much more noticeable when objects are very close to the camera, and is one of the reasons why the depth of field in macro photos is so small. In order to keep the image of a close object sharp, the lens must be moved relative to the screen or camera sensor. This process is called focusing. When you are focused on an object at a certain distance, then objects which are closer or more distant than that will not be in focus. The situation can be helped somewhat by reducing the size of the lens to restrict the variety of angles of light entering the lens. But we again are faced with the loss of brightness as a result.
This is what is called a zoom lens. where it has a functionality of changing focal length right by turning this ring. So the range of this lens, as it says on the lens, is 24 to 120 millimeters, which that means that in the wide angle format it is 24 mm, and when you want to go closer to the subject, you zoom in straight and take it to 120 or any value in between, which means if I want to be on 80 or 75 or 70 mm, depending on how far the subject is or how close I want to go with the subject, I am able to turn the ring and take a closer or wider angle photograph. Now, of course, there are some other buttons that are here, which are the VR button, which is the vibration reduction button. There is a manual focus or an automatic focus. Now, a lot of good lenses come with both options. So even if the camera is controlling the focus, that is actually controlling where the subject is and what the camera is focusing on, you can actually move the focus ring, which is the first ring from the camera, and actually change the point of focus. Sometimes when the frame is bigger and there are 2 or 3 objects at a different distance from the camera, you may want to keep either the closer object in focus and keep the object which is farther away out of focus. Or for instance, sometimes you may keep the object which is farther away in focus and keep the object which is closer away out of focus. Now, to give you an example, now if this is the subject and I want to focus on this, I will set it up at a certain length and a certain focus, and I will be able to get focus on it. But for instance, if there are 2 of these objects at a different distance, then I have to choose which one do I need to focus on. There is only one point of focus in the camera. Of course, what can be changed is actually the depth of field or the range in which you will get an apparent focus. Again, there is going to be only one point of focus, but the range of focus can be different and can be changed based on the depth of field.
We have discussed about the main reasons to use a lens, to make an image brighter and to make it bigger or smaller. Recap. Shots give perspective to a picture, whereas shutter speed gives the viewer a feel of the movements captured, and focus gives clarity and depth. All 3 technical aspects together formulate a great photograph. Once we understand all the 3, creating a right picture becomes a lot easier. I hope you enjoyed the session. Thank you and goodbye.